Once again, a warm Happy Father's Day greetings to everyone. As we continue our journey through the book of Esther, today we thought to do something that is kind of like adapted to the celebration of the day, Father's Day. So we're going to consider a tale of two fathers in the book of Esther. And as a way of starting, I'll just throw out this question. From everything we've covered so far in our journey through the book of Esther, 8 chapters completed, we're halfway into chapter 9. Which father figures in that book, and of course, for those that are joining us for the first time, based on your memory of what you know from the book of Esther, which father figures in the book of Esther stands out to you, good or bad? And what can we learn about how they went about their fatherhood or their parents in that sense? That's basically what we want to discuss. And then I will zoom in into 3 fathers actually and just share a few thoughts that the Holy Spirit laid on my heart about them that we can learn together. But let's start from that point of just an interactive conversation. Take 1 or 2 contributions before we delve into what we have on the screen. If you want to contribute, you can just unmute yourself and go for it. Okay, Mami Ogbena, go on.
Yeah, my one there is Mordecai.
Okay, what about
yeah,
him?
the way he fathered Esther, he trained Esther, even though Esther was an orphan. He took her as a daughter and he took care of her until the time she became a queen. So that's what I will say. He's a role model as a father. Esther looked up to him as a father, and he did not disappoint her. Rather, he made her a queen. So that's the first one I know.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. Does any other person want to contribute about any other father figure in the book of Esther? Good or bad?
Haman was bad.
I'm coming. Any other contribution?
Another one.
I'd say Haman, it was a bad father figure in the sense that he just to kill a good man basically without cause, just because he refused to bow down to him. And by doing that, he lost his life and his children suffered a loss. Obviously, his family will suffer a loss, losing their father figure. So yeah, that's my example.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I don't know if there's any other father figure in the book of Esther that anybody wants to cite. I think those are the 2 most prominent ones for us at quick glance. But does anybody want to share any other thing? Oh, yeah? Is someone saying something? Okay, I'll go into the study then. Actually, the 2 examples that we gave are the first 2 examples that readily comes to mind, just like I said. Mordecai as an exemplary father of some sort, and Haman as a bad example of another sort. We know that Mordecai raised Esther in spite of not being his biological child. And one thing that we could glean from that or take home from that is the fact that actually in terms of parenting, our children are not our children. They are actually God's children. The Bible says children are the heritage of the Lord. They are God's property of some sort. And we are only caretakers. Because I think that's what Mordecai modeled. He took care of Esther, whether or not Esther was his biological child. He modeled the fact that he acted as the role of a caretaker, basically, in the life of Esther. Secondly, parenting Esther in the diaspora, I thought that was also quite fascinating because, of course, we know Esther is Jewish, Mordecai is Jewish, but you discover that Mordecai raised Esther in a way that enabled Esther to stay true to our Jewishness, to our Jewish heritage. But at the same time, you find that participating in a beauty pageant in a foreign land. And the way that came across to me is a book I read a couple of years ago that is titled Roots and Wings. It's written especially for those that are parenting discipling their children in a foreign context, so to speak. How that we're supposed to give them that root of they know who they are, they know where they come from, they know their heritage, but at the same time, we leave them or give them the leverage to explore the potentials of living in the context of wherever it is that they found themselves. So for instance, in the United Kingdom, there are different people in our congregation that have different heritages. You don't want to dissociate totally from that heritage. You want your children to actually know who they are. You want them to know the heritage that they share, because we are all people that have histories in that sense. But besides that, you also want to explore all the limitless possibilities that your present situation, the place where you're living, offers. And I think Mordecai modeled that very beautifully. In terms of the character legacy, the kind of things that we saw in the life of Mordecai that it could easily pass on to his children, Esther in this case, is his selflessness. He was selfless. That's why he could take another person's child and raise her. He was diligent and faithful. We saw that in chapter 2 when he was working in the king's palace. He was working at the gates. He eavesdropped on the people that were planning to assassinate the king. And he faithfully reported that and ensured that the king was protected, which was his duty. And those people were brought to book. And that's a very good example of what fathers do. They model diligence and faithfulness, even when he's serving in what seemed to be an ungodly kingdom. In that sense, he was still faithful to do his responsibility. The third thing I thought to point out is how he taught and guided Esther. You remember in chapter 4, after Haman had done what he wanted to do, brought the law, the edict that was signed by the king to assassinate all the Jews. It was in chapter 4 that Mordecai modeled guidance for Esther. He instructed her basically, made her say, perhaps you have been appointed queen for such a time as this. He taught her, he guided her, he was there for her. Another thing I saw personally was vulnerability. Mordecai was not the perfect macho man kind of father figure. In chapter 4, we were told that he cried, he wept bitterly, he mourned. In other words, he didn't hide his emotions. I don't know, some of us come from a background where it seemed manly. The more you are able to hide your true emotions, the more manly you are. But actually, we don't find that as modeled by Christ, for example, who, when he was very close to the cross, went to the garden, took people with him. Bible says his soul was vexed. He prayed, his tears were like drops of blood. That was someone that was showing his vulnerability, saying, I'm feeling this and I'm not hiding it, because we're not all, we're all humans. None of us is like, nobody has it all together. And above all, Mordecai was a worshiper. The main reason why Haman hated him and therefore hated all the Jews was because Mordecai would not bow down to him. And Mordecai would not bow down because he's doing that in consistency with how the Jewish people will worship. They are to bow to God and only God. So he was a worshiper. And that was the kind of legacy we saw through all the things that we've studied about him. And how did he end? He ended in honor. He ended in honor. He was great, basically. By the time we get to chapter 10, he summarized that for us, how he rose to the highest ranking place in the kingdom, next to being the king. Haman, on the other hand, we know from chapter 9 that eventually, not only the fact that he died, all of his 10 sons also died. And they died on the account of their dad's legacy. So he was a perfect example of a bad father. And what's to take home from that is that what you do today can influence your children's future. The things we're doing now, the things we're doing day in, day out, as an influence, an unspoken influence that will tell. It's just a matter of time on our children. And so we want to be careful the way we do things, the kind of things we do, the deeds of today. They are seeds, basically, for the future. And Bible says he had 10 sons, and this is just me thinking, could it be that he gave birth to too many than he can handle? I don't know, but that's just a by the way thoughts that we could play with. Now, talking of his own character legacy, he was proud. It was the pride that got to his head that made him hate Mordecai for what Mordecai did. He was an angry man. It seemed like he was diabolic, because the whole process of him throwing the dice to determine when the date would be for the Jews to be assassinated, there is a measure of diabolism going on in there. And a bit of gambling as well. then he was very manipulative. He manipulated the king, manipulated authority. We didn't hear of him in chapter 1 and 2. We just heard that in chapter 3, he has risen to become the king's favorite. Very manipulative and vengeful. He had vengeance in his veins. Those are very bad character to leave behind as a legacy to anybody. And what was his end? He ended in shame and he ended in death. But as we wrap it up together, the other father that I think we can definitely pick on in that book is the good father, God himself, the one whose name was not mentioned throughout the book of Esther, but whose unseen hand was written throughout the whole story. And so we see God from the beginning, from chapter 1 to chapter 10, is in every chapter, even though he's not physically seen. And we can learn a lot about fatherhood from the actions or inactions, as it were, of God throughout that story. For instance, the big theme is sovereignty. He's the one in charge of everything. He's the one that decides the outcome of any and every event. The Bible says he knows the end of a thing from the beginning. When Haman was rolling the dice, he's the one that knew the outcome, that picked a favorable date that was going to give ample time for everything that needed to happen so that the Jews can eventually be vindicated, be secured, be kept safe. And again, he was merciful. It was merciful in the sense that actually we are talking of Mordecai and we're making it sound like Mordecai is this perfect, wonderful, good example. But the fact is, he wasn't exactly a model person in the sense of, if we want to read the book of Esther and vis-a-vis the laws that God has given them, Esther is not supposed to have married a Persian king to start with. That was ungodly. But yet, even in that state of ungodliness of some sort, even in that state of mistakes here and there, both on the part of Esther and on the part of Mordecai, God still dealt with them graciously and mercifully. And as fathers, of course, that's one thing we want to model. We want to be able to, Pastor was saying on Thursday in the Bible study, that whatever my son does, my son is still my son. That's a merciful father. That's a loving father. That's a gracious father. And then, of course, he protected the Jewish people. He protected them. He provided for them. And of course, he promoted them. He promoted Mordecai from being at the gates, as it were, to becoming the prime minister in a foreign kingdom. And so we see all of these things modeled by God for us, even though it wasn't expressly seen in the book, but he remains a good father. And what's the end of God? The end of God is endless because he has no beginning and he has no end. And that takes us to a personal reflection question. What kind of father are you? Or what kind of father do you want to be? To the teenagers amidst us that are still growing up, Favor, Paul, Judge, what kind of father would you want to be? And what kind of father are we, the ones that are men already? What kind of examples are we leaving behind for those that God has committed to our care, either biologically or otherwise, that we're parenting one way or the other? I'll pause there before I take the conclusion and just ask if there are any other thoughts that anybody wants to add, or questions or comments before we take the conclusion and pray and move on. If you want to make a contribution and you're muted, you can just unmute yourself. I can't see everybody at a glance because of the slides. Okay. Pastor, you want to say something? Okay. All right. So in conclusion, first and foremost, yet another opportunity to say Happy Father's Day and celebrate the fathers in our midst. I thank God for this church. I thank God for this congregation, this family, and the fathers that God has blessed us with. I thank God for Pastor Davis and his fatherly care and fatherly oversight over all of us. We're very grateful, and we thank God for our lives. We'll be praying for the fathers, especially during the prayer session that Pastor will be handling. But above it all, I just want us to hold on to that good father. The truth is, while very many of us will have good father memories, father experiences, and Father's Day would remind different people of different things or different conditions. We'll meet people in different contexts. But the fact is, there is a good father that is always there for us. There is a good father that is the father to the fatherless. I mean, my wife has had her own bout of a bit of emotion this morning, remembering that, okay, today is Father's Day and our dad is no more. And there will be people like that. But even in the midst of all of that, we know that there is a good Father who is always there, always protecting, always providing, always healing, always journeying with us. He never makes us walk alone. We walk together every step of the way. And I would like us to just lean into him, keep trusting him. As we go on in the rest of this service, let that continue to ring through in the sessions that we'll take, that there is a good Father. As a matter of fact, that's the song we'll be singing during the praise and worship. To let that percolate in our hearts, that truth become a reality to each and every one of us. And I pray that the fatherhood of God will continue to guide us, to hold us in the grip of his grace, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.